Okay, so moving on, we need our pieces EB1, EB2, and our 4 by 14 inch scrap, or not scrap, 4 by 14 inch piece of Decoville Heavy or Peltex. We also need our scraps of Decoville or duct tape or painter's tape, and we need our purse feet. This is where you'll need to decide how many purse feet you want to add. So I have my EB1, and my EB2 pieces right here. Now, in the cutting instructions, she gives different measurements to use if you prefer to cut EB1 in one long piece so that you don't have a center seam here when you sew it together. This is what I've chosen to do for this one. I've chosen not to have the center seam, so I've cut this one long piece for this, and then my EB2 separate. She also gives instructions for cutting EB1 and EB2 as one longer piece as well. That way there you don't have any seams, but I'm just going with this way just so I can show you in the video how to do it if you were attaching these pieces like this. She also gives instructions for measurements, where to make some marks. I've gone ahead and done that as well just for time purposes. Then she gives you instructions for where to place measurements for where you're placing your purse feet. Again, I've gone ahead and I've marked all those marks. I'm using a sew-in Peltex, so I had to glue mine in place. I've made the marks for my purse feet. I'm going to use 6 purse feet for this bag because I do not have that center seam here. It's not going to affect anything, so I can go ahead and use 6 purse feet. So I'm going to go ahead and install those 6 purse feet in place. So again, you'll want to look at the instructions on page 20 for where to make all the marks that I have made, the measurements and all the marks. If you did a side seam, you're going to use the middle seam, you're going to use your middle seam for where you're marking over. I don't have a middle seam, so I measured the middle of this EB1 piece, made my mark in the middle, and I measured from there. So there's my 6 purse feet. So I'm going to make my marks with, or cut my marks with my seam ripper carefully. Again, all the measurements are given in the pattern for where you need to make these marks for your purse feet, and the marks you see on my EB1 panel as well, and my EB2. Oops. Push your purse feet through, and I like to open them up. If your purse feet do not have any prongs with them, you can use a piece of scrap Peltex or Decoville Heavy. You'll cut the holes in them as well. So same way you cut the slits for that. I just cut little squares of Peltex. Just enough to help hold the purse feet, give them extra strength when they're in the bag. Just like that. Press the purse feet open. They don't have to be an exact measurement of a square, just as long as it's a scrap enough for the purse feet to go through and give it something extra to grab onto. Then I just like to press them against my table just to make sure that they're pushed nice and flat. And I will take some painter's tape and put them over the purse feet prongs. Same reason as we did for the metal tag. It just helps prevent the prongs from poking through to your lining. There will be foam between this. We will be attaching foam to our lining panel. So the foam will protect it, but it's just extra protection, extra security. And there you go. Purse feet are all installed, just like that. Next, we're going to put these aside. Next, we need our crossbody strap connectors. We need our crossbody strap connectors and our EG. And you will need your 2 D-rings. First thing we need to do is fold our crossbody strap connector in half. And you're going to slide your D-ring to the half point. So my crossbody strap connector is folded in half. I'm going to fold my D-ring right up to the fold, slide it right up to that fold, and place a clip in place to help hold it there. Repeat this for the other crossbody strap connector. You want to make sure that the raw edges are in between the folds so you don't see them. So that's the wrong sides. They will be wrong sides together. And place a clip. Next thing we need to do is mark the center of our EG panels. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I just make a line going up just a little bit. Then we need some double-sided tape. And you're going to place a piece of double-sided tape onto your crossbody strap connector. You'll place it right up the center of the crossbody strap connector. I like to go until just before I hit the D-ring. So probably about a ½ inch approximately away from the D-ring. This way here when I'm stitching, if I don't stitch right up to where the tape stops, the tape won't be seen. It does wash away, but not everybody washes their bags right away when they get them. And there you go. I've got both of them with some double-sided tape attached. Now I'm going to take the backing off the double-sided tape, and I'm going to center this on my EG panel, lining up the bottom short edge of the crossbody strap connector with the short edge of the EG panel. You want to make sure this is centered, so I just measure to make sure it's centered. Mine is. I will take this clip off the bottom of the crossbody strap connector and place it there. Give this a nice press down. Then repeat this for the other side. Center this. Before you push it down, check to see if it's centered. If you need to make any adjustments, now is the time to do it. Mine's all centered. And give it a press down. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew up one side, across by the D-ring, and back down. For extra security, when you get up to the D-ring, stitch over, then back stitch, then stitch back again. This just gives some extra security here up at the top. When you're stitching, because these pieces, you could tape them together, but mine aren't taped together. As I'm stitching, I'm just going to make sure that this stays nice and straight. If you're really worried about that staying straight, you can add a piece of double-sided tape between these 2 layers here. That'll just help hold this in place for you. So again, stitching this with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance up, across by the D-ring, and back down. There you go. I went up one side, across where the D-ring is, back stitched, then went forward again, and back down the other end. When I back stitched, I did it down at the bottom here just to help hold the bottom edge in place. Another thing, if you're worried about getting angled stitches in these corners, reduce your stitch length to a 0. With your needle down, take 1 stitch, turn your panel around, return your stitch length back to the length you usually stitch with, stitch across with your needle down here again, put your stitch length down to 0, take 1 stitch, return your stitch length, turn your panel around, and stitch back down. That'll help prevent these angled stitches in the corner and just gives nice clean corners. So I'm going to repeat that for the remaining EG panel. Before I forget, I had some tape. I stitched over it, that's okay. It comes off. There we go. So there are our 2 completed EG panels with the D-rings attached and the strap connector. Next, what you'll want to do, or what you can do if you prefer, is you can add a rivet onto the strap connector just below it where Kristen gives the measurement for. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If you do not have rivets, you can go ahead and use Chicago screws. They work. They're a good alternative to rivets. And there you go. I've installed some rivets. Again, if you don't have rivets, you can use Chicago screws. If you don't have either, that's okay. Your stitching up here will hold it, but you can also make a little box and form an X inside the little box. Do it about an inch, make the box an inch high. And that'll also add some extra security here for your connector. Now we need to grab our EB1 and EB2 pieces that have the purse feet attached, and the EB2 have some markings on them, and you need these EG pieces. What you're going to do is sew the EB2 to your EB1 piece using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to clip them together on the short edges, just like that. So my short edges are clipped together. To remove these pieces of tape before I accidentally sew over them again. You will then press these seams open, and you're going to stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on either side of the seams. So the seam is pressed open, you're top stitching an 1/8 of an inch. You'll repeat that for the other end. And there is my EB1 and EB2 all stitched together and top stitched. Next, we need to add our EG pieces to our EB1, EB2 panel. So you're going to align the short edges. The edges that you will align for the EG to the EB1, EB2 is going to be the short edge that has the raw end of your connector. Clip the short edges on both sides. Just like that. And then you will sew these short edges with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So it's going to look like this. That's how you want it clipped. So there's my EB1, EB2 panel and my crossbody strap connector panel. Then you will press the EG panel down towards your EB1, EB2 panel and top stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press your other EG panel down towards the EB1, EB2 panel. Press or finger press and top stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And there is your completed side panel. She has you make some marks along your edges. You can go ahead and do that. I have them marked here, but as you can see, they kind of brushed off because I'm using chalk, because this is black and my Frixion pen will not show up. So you can go ahead and make those marks now, as well as if you haven't already marked your center of the panel, go ahead and mark the center now. We are almost done. Kristen says time for a stretch break. Get out of your chair, do a few stretches, pop to the kitchen, grab a snack if you desire. We're nearly done. Okay, so now we are going to attach our gusset to our exterior panels. So we need both our completed exterior panels and this gusset. You can also use a stapler if you want for this to help attach things together and hold everything in place. First, what we need to do, you only need one exterior. You're going to lay it right side up on your work surface. You're going to take your gusset, place it right sides together with your exterior. What I do is I pin up at the top first. Then I come down and I pin my center marks on the bottom of the exterior and the center mark on the side gusset together. Place a few clips, and I will pin the other top edge. Now, this gusset is going to seem really long, and it will seem like this isn't going to work and it's not going to make sense, but trust me, it does. It's actually turns out to be a really beautiful bottom with a nice square base. Then the next step is you're going to take this seam where your EB1 and EB2 pieces were sewn together. If you just cut this so it was one long piece, you won't have this seam, so you won't need to worry about it. Just worry about pinning all the way at the top. Just worry about pinning your tops in your center. Then you're going to pin all the way down, and when you sew, you're still going to sew it the same way, stopping and starting at the 1/2 inch mark. So for here, if you do have it like I do, where you have a seam where your EB1 and your EB2 met, that seam is going to line up with the seam on your TZP panel, where the TZP meets your exterior. So this seam right here. So EB1, EB2 seam will line up with your trim and zipper panel seam, just like that. Pin all the way up. After you have that pinned in place, you can use as many clips as you like, or as many pins. If you are comfortable using staples, you can go ahead and use staples here as well. Just keep the staples within your seam allowance so that you don't accidentally stitch over them. I kind of went a little bit crazy with the pins. Again, the seam where EB1 and EB2 join, so right here, is going to line up with the seam where my TZP panel meets my exterior panel. And I'm going to line that up and place a clip in place to help hold it there. And then again, pin the side to the side of the exterior. I'm using a lot of clips so that nothing shifts on me while I'm sewing. Now we're going to put a couple more clips in the bottom. Be careful you're not clipping anything together under here. Just like that. So your gusset will be longer than your panel itself. There will be some extra here, but that's okay. We're going to take care of that later. First, what you're going to do is, starting at the top, you're going to sew this all the way down until you meet the 1/2 inch marks down here where they meet up. If your lines disappeared like mine did, or you can barely see them, you'll want to go ahead and remake those marks so that you know where to start and stop. You want to start and stop a 1/2 inch, or stop, sorry, a 1/2 inch away from the bottom. So I'm going to make that mark just so I can see where to stop. And this is very important to make sure you're starting and stopping at that 1/2 inch mark. That'll help give you the nice box corner later. So starting at the top, sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, sew all the way down the side and stop when you hit your 1/2 inch away from the bottom edge. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now you'll want to go back and within the seam allowance, just slightly over from it, you'll want to sew a second row of stitches. This is just for extra security. We'll repeat this process for the second side, starting at the top, so all the way down until you get a 1/2 inch away from the bottom edge. Because this is attached up here, and we're sewing this way, if you're more comfortable, you can start at the bottom and work your way up. And there we go. Both our sides are sewn to our exterior. Now we need to stitch the bottom. You will start and stop a 1/2 inch away, so where your marks are, you will start and stop. Again, mine sort of faded. You'll want to make sure that you pull this part out so you're only stitching on top of the bottom of the base. You don't want to have it tucked like this, so where this gets tucked in here, you just want to sew through 2 layers. Take your time and go slow and hold everything together with your clips and sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We'll repeat the same thing we did for the side and sew a second row of stitches. There we go. Your gusset is now attached to your first exterior panel. We're going to repeat this whole process for the second exterior panel. So clip the top edges together, lining up those corners. Clip the bottom centers. My EB1 and EB2 seam here will line up with my TZP and my exterior panel seam. And then I'll pin my bottom. My marks disappeared at my bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and remake the 1/2 inch mark at the bottom. And you'll repeat that whole process for sewing the side gusset and the opposite side and the bottom to your exterior front panel. The same thing we did before. So from the top down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, go in, make another row of stitching for both sides and the bottom. Don't forget to stop when you reach the 1/2 inch away mark at your bottom here, your 1/2 inch from the bottom on both sides. When you're sewing, make sure you're moving any panels out of the way. You're only sewing through the side and the exterior. You don't want to sew through anything else as you're going. Just the side and the exterior. Starting and stopping a 1/2 inch away from the bottom. Go and repeat my stitching for a second row on both sides. And then I will sew my bottom starting and stopping a 1/2 inch away from the edge. And again, sew a second row of stitches. Make sure none of your other panel pieces are in the way while you're stitching. That is sewn together. Now we will pinch this excess here that you have in the bottom of the side gusset. You're going to pinch it and then place some clips to keep it nice and flat, just like that. And you're going to sew starting and stopping where your stitches are, and you'll sew straight across. You can sew on this side so you can see your seam allowance, because you've drawn a seam allowance here as well. You'll start and stop right where your stitches are and sew across. You'll be stitching right beside your Paltex that you've fused or your Decoville. You want to make sure everything is nice and flat so you're not stitching through anything else but those bottom layers. You will have a lot of excess material here. That's okay. Again, starting and stopping where your stitches are. Same thing as you did with the sides and the bottom. So a second row of stitches. And you're going to repeat that for the other side where the excess material is. Flatten it out, pinch it, place some clips to hold it in place, and then you will stitch right beside your heavy interfacing, starting and stopping where your stitches are made on your bottom panel. That's where you'll know where to stop. Make sure you move everything out from the way so you're only stitching between the gusset and between those stitches. So I'll show you how it looks, just so you can see. So as you can see, my stitching goes from the row of stitches here all the way across to the other row of stitches here, and I have all this excess fabric. That's okay. So just here, this is how we made a nice boxed bag. As you can see, the corner will be boxed. If you reach your hand in, you've got a nice bottom boxed corner. Again, you can see where my stitches started and stopped between the stitches on the side. Now I'm going to trim my seam allowances. You want to trim them down to half the width. This will just help reduce all that excess bulk. So you can see I just trimmed my bottom panel and I trimmed this piece off here that was right there. That's the bulk you trim off. So we're trimming all the seam allowances down now. Trim all the side seams and the bottom seams. Be careful not to clip your stitches. We're going to clip our corners on an angle. Careful not to clip your corner stitches where the stitching meets. You just want to clip those corners on an angle. This will help push the corners out nicer for you. Again, don't clip your stitches. Be very careful. If you do, you can always go back and back stitch over it just to make sure they stay in place. And everything is trimmed, and that is what it will look like right now from the wrong side. You can see inside the bag. Again, you will have what you've cut off the bottom right here, some excess. That excess that we've cut off helps make a nice boxed gusset. You can set this aside for now, and we're going to move on to our lining.